Alright guys, we're finally outside of Narsh and we can explore the outdoors. And as you can see, we have an open world map in the bottom right of the screen with continents and various locations for us to visit. But for now, we will be journeying to Figaro Castle to meet the king and to continue the story. The old man in Narsh mentioned visiting the king in Figaro, and he also mentioned trying to contact the Returners, which is a faction that opposes the Empire. And they're sort of a big deal. They play a huge role in the story, and we're going to learn all about them in the very near future. But for now, we will be focusing on Figaro, and as I make my way there, one of the first things you'll notice is I'm starting to use the steal ability for Locke a little bit. Early on in the game, it can certainly be helpful to acquiring some basic items here and there and sort of stocking up your inventory of consumables especially. But late game, Locke can steal some flat out powerful items that are incredibly helpful. And I've always thought that keeping Locke leveled up and in your party as much as you can is highly beneficial. And we're finally at Figaro. This place is really cool, guys. We're gonna find out why in the near future, but for now I just kind of explore a couple of the side rooms here that sort of build up the lore. This is where the thieves have been kept, and you know, it's a good thing that guy didn't call Locke a thief, or Locke probably would have flipped out on him. And it's a good thing that guy doesn't know about Locke's tendencies as well at this point. But this room was mentioned as the engine room, and that they're ready to leave at a moment's notice. Is this guy trying to say that this castle has travel capabilities? I kind of think that he is. But for now, we are going to make our way to the throne room and not only meet the King of Figaro, but our next party member. And I gotta say, my first few times playing this game, and you know, perhaps even more, my early experiences with this game, I always liked this character. I always thought he was pretty cool, but it wasn't until later on that I really started to consider him one of my all-time favorites, and really started feeling compelled to kind of keep him involved throughout the story and to use him, make use of his talents. And, you know, Edgar, this guy, you know, even though he's royalty and a powerful man, he's got a heart of gold. And throughout the game, he demonstrates his willingness to help Terra and to help others, his friends. And it's really that willingness to help others that makes you love this guy. And this isn't something that he had to do, you know. He's friends with the Empire at this point, and although his friendship with the Empire is a ruse and it's merely strategy, and a smart strategy at that, you know, he doesn't have to do this. He's a powerful guy, and he's got plenty of means of defending himself at his disposal, and his people. But he puts himself out there, and, you know, he wants to do the right thing. And, you know, immediately he's introduced as a really strong character. So we have our brief moment with Edgar, and we start to move through the story a little bit. We're not necessarily moving through the story, but we are exploring the castle, rather, and we're trying to take advantage of some of the things that it has to offer. One of the first things it has to offer, obviously, is some nice unopened treasure chests that happen to be laying about, and we get a phoenix down out of that chest, which is obviously a pretty nice thing to have. It can resurrect dead party members. And these little side shops are also very, very not important for progression, but helpful to progression. This shop in particular, which sells some of Edgar's tools, is very helpful. Edgar, of course, being a master craftsman of machinery, his special ability is the usage of these unique tools, and some of them are extremely helpful. Some of them are very powerful early game, and some of them are powerful late game, so he's just a very well-rounded character and useful in many different ways. And this little shop here, what's important to me about this shop is the antidotes, the softs, and the echo screams. These items can cure some of the various status ailments that you can find yourself afflicted with throughout the game. And let me just go ahead and mention that some of the status ailments that you can be affected by not only are annoying and tough to deal with if you don't have the means to counter them, but they can be downright debilitating. And there are tons of status ailments in this game that can basically take your characters out of commission. So as many means as you have early on to combat those status ailments as you run into them, the better. In fact, I believe that the next dungeon-like area that we find ourselves in after Figaro has creatures in it that will affect you with those sorts of status ailments. I don't think that you're going to be debilitated at this point in the game by the ailments, but they can certainly hinder you. So I continue to make my way through the castle. As you saw, I came out on the side of the castle in that one area. I realized I shouldn't be there just yet. And I continue to sort of talk to the inhabitants of Figaro, and we further discover that Edgar sort of has a aggressive style when it comes to pursuing women. And yep, we already knew he fancied himself a ladies' man, but we didn't know it was that bad. Hitting on priestesses? Come on, Edgar. And here we go, man. We are at our first cutscene, so I'm gonna go ahead and cut out. It should be a pretty brief one. I'll see you guys in a couple minutes. So we have a touching cutscene that illuminates some of the details of the succession, and we're introduced to another party member, Sabin, who happens to be Edgar's twin brother as well. It's also one of the first parts in the story that gives me chills. The detail of Sabin's description that mentions he traded the throne for his own freedom, and already we start to formulate our own opinions and ideas as to the succession. It also shows us how disturbed Edgar was by the passing of his father, the king, and that lends a lot of humanity to that character because we can all sympathize with the passing of loved ones. So we already start to understand more about who Edgar is, the kind of person he is, and his family. We know that he has a twin brother out there somewhere and who traded the throne for his own freedom. And this is another part that gives me chills, this dialogue with the Chancellor. The succession was settled with a coin toss, ... Like, you know, we don't know the details of the succession, but we know that it was settled with a coin toss. And and we can only assume that both brothers were willing to look out for each other, and each one was willing to sort of sacrifice what they wanted to do in life for the throne and to help the other brother. That's what I always got from that bit of dialogue. And of course, we finally meet our villain live in the flesh, and this is our arch-villain in the game. And, you know, Kefka, although he is completely over the top and clownish and just flat out goofy, a lot of the things he says, he is insane. And it is his insanity that really powers his evil throughout the game, where some villains are kind of gray area villains, and by gray area I mean they have reasons behind doing the evil things they might do, and they might have logical reasons behind doing these things. Kefka is not one of those types of villains. He is simply an evil dude who's insane, and I really appreciate that with villains. I love villains that obviously have humanity and who, you know, perhaps you can understand and sympathize with from time to time, but I also like just flat out bad dudes that you're not supposed to like and you're supposed to hate. And Kefka is definitely one of those types of villains. He's just simply insane, and although you find out the reasons for his insanity later on, and perhaps those reasons might be things you could sympathize with, he is more of a bad dude than a good dude. He's, you know, 99.9% evil, and that's one thing that I really, really appreciate with the villain in this game. So we can only assume that Kefka did not buy Edgar's story. Edgar certainly thinks that Kefka will be back and has gone off to converse with the Chancellor about their strategy. But real quickly, before our next cutscene, these repeated questions between Terra and the people that appear to be helping her at this point are totally logical. Although she has amnesia and, you know, she still knows that she was an officer of the Empire. So she wants to know simply why these enemies of the Empire want her help. Like, why don't they hate her? And if they want her help, they must want her help because of her abilities, more so than anything else. And she's not totally wrong there. And I find that to be very interesting, even though these people are very nice to her and they appear to be friends. Their underlying goal is winning the war against the Empire, and they think that she could be key to doing that. So I'm going to cut out for this next cutscene, but once this is over, I'll be back for the rest of the episode, guys. See you soon. I really like that last little bit of dialogue from the Chancellor as they go into subterranean mode there. He says, "No one can touch the people of Figaro." Absolutely love that line. It gives me chills. But now we're being pursued by a couple Magitech soldiers here as we try to flee from Figaro, and we have Kefka hot on our heels. This fight is incredibly easy, and it's partly because we have Edgar on our side now. You know, we have some really, really nice tools at our disposal, which I'll talk about shortly. But, you know, first thing we do is we use a little bit of magic, which gets a pretty hilarious reaction out of Edgar and Locke. And it's understandable, though, because magic was responsible for nearly destroying the world 1,000 years ago. So it's only natural that these guys kind of freak out a little bit when they see this young woman able to wield magic so effectively. But one thing that the supporting cast does early on is they understand Terra's insecurities with her abilities, and they do a good job playing down their reactions and making everything seem much more natural. And that's ever so important to being able to kind of coax Terra along and settle her down. So that's exactly what they do here. They play down their reaction, and Terra's back and ready to go. So, and I think that they're pretty impressed over that. As you can see, the tops of their heads kind of fall off. But these tools, man, as you saw, that noise blaster is one of the few reasons why Edgar is so good right now. You know, obviously you can hit people with that noise blaster and they will face the opposite direction, which will cause them to hit themselves with their own attacks. And that's pretty good right there. But the auto crossbow that Edgar possesses is also a really nice tool, and it's a multi-attack which does great damage, especially at this point in the game. So we have officially escaped, and Kefka's in the rearview mirror here, and he has one of his greatest lines in the entire game right there. "Son of a submariner!" That's one that you don't hear too often, but we're gone. Kefka is in the rear view, and one quick thing that I'd like to talk about is some of the dialogue that happens in this section. And something that's very important to me is, you know, although Edgar and Locke at this point, they want Terra's abilities to help win the war against the Empire, they're of course going about doing it in a much nicer way than the Empire was when they wanted to control Terra. But nevertheless, the underlying reason is because they feel like she might be key to winning the war against the Empire. And they feel like that magic is the primary reason. But, you know, Terra is distraught over this, and it's perfectly understandable. You know, another group of people is trying to use her for her powers. And Edgar has a really great question he poses to her. He says, "Don't you want to find out more about your abilities?" And I feel like that's so crucial in keeping her around and interested for the time being. But this is the end of the episode, guys, and next time we will be picking up in this cave where we will be heading to South Figaro. I'll see you on the next one.